So my name is Robert Jensen, and for 26 years I taught at the University of Texas at Austin and the School of Journalism, which was part of the College of Communication. And if anybody, hi, come on in, you got to come up front. None of this sitting in the back. In fact, because you're late, I want your asses right up in the front row. You, up here, right now. I'm always surprised when people do what I tell them. I mean, this is the Austin School. This is Austin Community College. Hi, and we're doing names. And your name?
Jackson.
Oh, God, we got dual Jacksons. Watch out for the guy behind you. Yes. Pardon? Jocelyn. Nice to meet you. I'm Bob. Okay. So I taught at the University of Texas in the School of Journalism. I retired a little over a year ago now, and am now working on largely issues around the environment, ecological issues, and that is the subject that Roy asked me to speak about today. So I come to you not as an expert in environmental issues or ecology. I'm not trained as an ecologist, a biologist, an agronomist, a soil scientist. I'm not trained in any of those things. What I am is a citizen of the United States, and for much of my life, in fact, my entire adult life, I worked either as a journalist or a professor, which meant I had the incredible luxury of my entire adult life of doing work and getting paid, eventually paid fairly well, to know things, to learn things. And that has been an incredible luxury. And that's what I'm going to report back to you today, what I've decided, learned about these ecological issues. Now, I said I'm not an expert, but I hope I'm not just talking off the top of my head. I've spent a lot of time thinking and working with other people. So I'm offering you what I believe to be an informed analysis of some pressing questions that face everyone on this planet at this point. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. The news about these questions is not good. The news is getting worse, and the news is getting worse faster than we ever expected. So if you've had a long day and you needed something upbeat to end your day with, this is not that. If that's what you need, you already signed in, take off. It's okay, you can leave. But I do want to talk fairly bluntly, fairly honestly, because I can't imagine how we're going to make any progress if we cannot at least accurately identify the state of the world, identify the problems that have led to that state of the world, and at least start thinking rationally about what to do about it. Seem fair? Good, because it's what you're going to get whether you like it or not. First question, and this is important, and I'm not just asking rhetorically. Two questions, and I want everybody to weigh in. What do you, as a person, what do you want in the world? And the second question is, why are you in school? What do you want out of the world, and why are you in school? I'm not going to go around and ask everybody, but let's just sort of throw answers. What do you want? And there's no right answer. An honest answer would be best. So don't say world peace or, good tidings for all my fellow humans. What do you want?
I want to do something I enjoy.
Something you enjoy. Okay. All right, come on up. What do you want? What do you want in the world? What are you after?
To live comfortably.
Live comfortably. That's an honest answer. Okay, what else?
Happiness.
Happiness.
Be remembered, I guess.
Be remembered. Why are you in school? Why come back to school? Or why start school if you're right out of high school? Why come to school? University level. To advance and do better. Okay.
Learn more and probably make a living at it.
Yeah. Learn more, hopefully make a living. Okay. Hi, everybody. Come on in. You're late, but we're not going to hold it against you.
To get a piece of paper to say, yeah, you can do something you enjoy.
All right. I think if you ask most people, what do you want out of the world? The question to be comfortable, to not be always scraping at some minimal level of subsistence, yes? And often we go back to school to pursue advanced education to maximize our earning potential to make that possible, yes? If you have those on your list of goals, would you consider yourself fairly normal? Yeah? How many people do you know whose goal it is to significantly lower their material standard of living and who go to school to further their ability to lower their standard of living? Nobody. That would be, at least statistically, abnormal, yes? All right. So we're going to come back to that, but just keep that in the back of your mind. What most people are after in this world. And by most people, we're talking specifically about this culture, but a lot of this generalizes. Okay. The advertised title of this is The Green New Deal and Beyond. And what I want to talk about, as I said before some of you came in, is an honest account of ecological realities, an attempt to understand how those realities came to be and then what we might do about them. So, the phrase I use most often to describe the state of the planet, the state of the ecosphere, which is a term people I work with use for this planet. Hi, everybody, come on in, come on up. Don't go too far back, you won't be able to hear. The ecosphere, right? This planet on which we live. Right? The phrase I use to describe the current state of that ecosphere is that it is a planet that is defined by multiple, cascading ecological crises. Multiple, cascading ecological crises. Nobody's writing this shit down. This is good stuff, people. You should be writing this down, for God's sake. You don't have to. I'm just kidding. Huh? Yeah, look at it. Get that paper out. Never go anywhere without... Yeah. Multiple cascading ecological crises. It's a phrase I borrow from a friend of mine who paid close attention to the state of that ecosphere for all 79 years of his life till he passed away. And my friend Jim used to say, this is a world defined by multiple cascading ecological crises. Multiple crises, not just one, many of them. Cascading meaning they are going to play out in ways that are unpredictable, that interact. What are those multiple cascading ecological crises? Well, one that we'll come back to is, of course, climate change, global warming, rapid climate destabilization, different terms for it. And we will come back to that. But there are others of significance. One is the biodiversity question, species extinction. The human presence on this planet is driving into extinction many of our fellow creatures, and that is a problem because the health of the ecosphere is a question of the integrity of ecosystems, and when you start pulling out species, the integrity of those ecosystems can collapse pretty quickly. So we have climate change, we have species extinction, we have chemical contamination of soil, water, yes. In the 20th century, especially the post-World War II era, we humans have introduced thousands and thousands of chemicals with which our own tissues have no evolutionary history. We didn't evolve with them. Our bodies don't necessarily know what to do with them. We've introduced thousands of chemicals into the environment. Many of those chemicals introduced with little or no testing. Those that have been tested are typically tested as a single chemical in its effect. We have virtually no idea how these chemicals interact. Chemical contamination of the land and water, that's a big problem. And the fourth of the big four that I always think about is soil erosion. The way we grow food in the modern world is distinguished by massive amounts of soil erosion. And for those who are not from farm country, just a quick reminder, food grows in soil. And when there's no soil left, there's no food. And we are losing massive amounts of soil. 27 billion tons a year of soil erodes, mostly either washed away or blown by wind. A lot of it into the streams, rivers, ends up in larger bodies of water. That's the problem of soil erosion. We don't think a lot about that in the cities, but that's a big one. So climate change, species extinction, chemical contamination, soil erosion. We have, of course, not exhausted the list of ecological crises, these multiple cascading ecological crises, but you're getting a hint on where I'm going with this, yes? Big, big problems. Okay. Keep that in the back of your mind as well as we focus over on climate change and the Green New Deal. Climate change, climate disruption, rapid climate destabilization, global warming, lots of terms you hear. Now, first of all, I want to sketch what I think are 4 positions you will find in the United States on the question of climate. Right, now, anytime you try to take a big society and put it into categories, I'm saying there are 4 types of people around climate in this culture. That's a simplification, yes? There's 330 million people in this country, and so it's hard to reduce everything to 4, but that's what we do in intellectual life. We create categories so we can organize the way we think about the world. So if you say to yourself, well, I'm not exactly in one of your categories, point taken. But I still think we can look at the current political landscape and see essentially 4 responses to climate change. The first is out-and-out climate change denial. The people who say that either there's no climate change or the climate change that's happening is normal, it's not, has nothing to do with human activity. Right. Climate change denial, you've all heard about this, yes? If anyone in the room is a climate change denier on that criteria, I really don't know what to say to you. Here's what I usually do when I'm talking about climate change. How many people in the room are trained climate scientists? That is, you have advanced education in climate science. Anybody? No, neither do I. How many of you have advanced training in a science that allows you to read original research in climate science and come to an educated assessment of the nature of that research? No, not me either. Okay. So none of us have an independent basis for determining the question of climate, correct? So this is true not only about climate, but about a whole lot of stuff in the culture because we live in a scientifically, technologically sophisticated culture. Right? So what do we do in such situations? Well, we trust in the scientific method, the peer review process by which scientists do work, submit it to their peers, it's evaluated. Is the scientific peer-reviewed process perfect? No, of course not, because human beings are not perfect. And science, the history of science is full of examples of what was once taken to be scientific fact being changed. Our understandings change over time. But at this point, the basics of climate change are widely accepted by virtually all climate scientists or people trained in ways that allow them to evaluate that. They do various surveys, and sometimes you'll hear 97% of climate scientists. Essentially, right now, it's effectively 100%. So if you're saying you don't believe in climate science, you don't believe in climate change, you don't believe that what they call anthropogenic climate change, human-generated climate change is real, then you have to explain to me why I should take your off-the-cuff opinion over the opinion of 100% of people trained in climate science. And that's usually pretty difficult to do. Okay. It doesn't mean scientists are always right about everything in perpetuity. And it certainly doesn't mean that scientists then have some special standing to tell us what to do about climate change. I'm not investing in scientists some godlike status. But anybody who denies the science around climate change has got a pretty hefty task in front of them. Okay. Climate change denial. Now, I don't know about nor really care about any of your political affiliations, but where is most of the climate change denial of this type housed in the American political system? What organization, what grouping is sort of ground zero for climate change denial? Yeah, the Republican Party. In fact, virtually all Republican candidates either deny human-generated climate change or dance around it, hoping to avoid the question. So ground zero for that denial is the Republican Party. And if anyone in the room is a member of the Republican Party, there's a serious issue there. Okay. That's one grouping. Fair enough? Okay. The second grouping are the people who accept climate change as a scientific reality, right? But I would say deny the implications of it. That is, they accept that human beings, our activities are dramatically warming the planet, and that warming has some pretty nasty consequences. But they deny the implications, that is, they deny what would be a logical conclusion of that science for human activity. Now, I'm going to pick up the pace here, but most of those people are in the Democratic Party, what we often call the mainstream Democrats, the centrist Democrats, the people who, if you're paying attention to the news, people like Nancy Pelosi. Now, most people don't think of Nancy Pelosi as a climate change denier because she accepts the science, but I would say that she's this second kind of climate change denier. She accepts the science, but doesn't seem interested in taking actions consistent with what that science tells us. Okay? And I think that's a kind of climate change denial. Not the same as the climate change denial that says the science isn't real. But in some sense, does it really matter? If you have two people, one of whom accepts the science, one of whom doesn't, and both of them will not commit to actions that are a logical consequence of the science, then does it matter which group you're in? No, not really. Okay. Now, there's a third group that is, again, typically rooted in the Democratic Party, and instead of mainstream or centrist would typically be called progressive Democrats. And these are the people who tend to cluster around the Green New Deal. And I'm going to argue they are climate change deniers of a sort as well. Now, they accept the science. They're not denying the science. And unlike mainstream Democrats, they believe immediate action is necessary. But I'm going to argue the action they believe is necessary is still inadequate to the task, and therefore, in the long run, also a form of denial. All right? Step one, turn the damn ringer off your phone, Jensen, for cripe's sake. Okay. Now, this might seem unexpected because the mainstream Democrats, the centrists, the group I'm going to identify around Nancy Pelosi, and the progressive Democrats who support the Green New Deal, and here you have a variety of people who tend to lead the news. There's folks like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. In Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's the single most famous first-term legislator in the history of the country, I think, right? So famous that she gets her own initials, AOC. If you're not familiar with her, check her out. Interesting person who's still in her 20s and a member of Congress. Okay. She's the person most identified with the Green New Deal. She introduced it on the House side. Okay. Now, the mainstream Democrats and the progressive Democrats are engaged in a bit of a struggle over the future of the party, and so you might think, well, they're quite different, but I am suggesting, in fact, they have more in common than there are differences. Right. Now, those are three positions. I said four. Guess what? There's a fourth position. It's the position that's sensible, and it happens to be the one I hold, yes? It was a joke, people. I know it's late in the day, but for God's sake. Of course there's a fourth position. Of course it's sensible, and of course I hold it, or otherwise I would be in one of those other categories, yes? All right. So I want to explain why I think the position I hold is a better way to think about this. But first, let's go back and talk about the Green New Deal for those who have not read the bill, the House resolution, or followed the news closely. All right. The Green New Deal, of course, evokes the New Deal of the Depression era, the famous governmental programs that tried to pull the United States out of the Great Depression in the 1930s, and eventually, with the help of World War II, were successful. Okay. Now, the Green New Deal harkens back to that, but instead of just a New Deal that addresses economic realities, The Green New Deal obviously signifies a different approach to our ecological crises as well. So if you're not familiar with it, the Green New Deal is really a response to climate change and a response to economic inequality, and especially the racialized dimensions of economic inequality. Right? Climate change, the Green New Deal is an attempt to respond to climate change and other ecological realities, and a response to economic inequality and the racialized dimension of that. On that second, the economic inequality and the racialized dimension, if you aren't actively following the news, let's just summarize. The United States is a drastically unequal society in the distribution of wealth. Right? There's a few people with a lot of money and a whole lot of people without much money. Economic inequality. It's an enduring feature of any capitalist economy, other economies as well, but we're in a capitalist economy, of course. And the degree of economic inequality changes over time. At this point, we're at record high levels of economic inequality, much more unequal than when I was born in 1958. Okay. There's also a racialized dimension to this. We know from massive amounts of data and experience that there's not only a gap between rich and poor, but that gap is racialized, that on average white people do better than non-white people economically. Of course, that doesn't mean every white person is flying high and, has a second vacation home and a private jet. But on average, we're looking at patterns, not at individual cases. Right? So the Green New Deal, coming out of a progressive Democrat base, is concerned about climate change and other ecological crises, and economic inequality and racialized disparities. Now, I think those are important things to be concerned about, and have spent most of my adult life thinking about them and trying to do something. All right. If you look at the Green New Deal, it offers goals. It's a proposal, not a really highly specified piece of legislation, but goals such as net zero emissions by 2050, carbon neutral, trying to change the way we generate energy so that the carbon that is currently driving climate change can be reduced to a net zero emissions, and various proposals to do that, including moving toward an electricity grid that would be based on 100% renewables, all sorts of things like that. All right. Now, people will argue about what's possible, how much of this can actually be achieved, but I really don't want to focus on that today. I want to think about it in different terms. So, Green New Deal, climate change, economic opportunity. And by the economic opportunity part of it includes things like job guarantees, job retraining, all sorts of programs. Okay. All of which individually, personally, I think are worthy of support. But I've identified the Green New Deal, the progressive Democrat response, as still a kind of climate change denial. Why? Because if you look at that proposal and listen to the people proposing it, and if you want to get a good sense of it, I recommend a video that's up on YouTube that in 8 minutes sort of summarizes it. And it was, the voiceover for it is by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and it was produced by a news site called The Intercept. So if you want to find this video, and I do recommend it, it's incredibly creative as well as interesting and informative. Just Google Green New Deal, The Intercept, and you'll find it. And there are a couple of interesting statements in there and interesting assumptions behind the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal essentially says two things: that the lifestyle that we typically identify as middle-class America, right? The material consumption associated with being in the middle class in the United States, which means certain kinds of things, yes? If not your own home, adequate housing, availability of nutritious food, entertainment possibilities, transportation, whether personal or mass transit, depending on where you live. The middle class lifestyle goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning when I asked what you all are hoping for in your lives, yeah? Now, maybe some of you want to be rich. Maybe some of you want to be just like Jeff Bezos and be the richest person in the world. Not my own goal, but a mystery phone somewhere. But I think the middle class goal is not uncommon, correct? And we could poll everybody in the room, and I would guess that most folks in the room either currently live in that category or aspire to. Maybe you grew up in that kind of world and you want to stay in it, or maybe you grew up in a world with less access to wealth and you would like to move up. But that's a very common idea, the middle class lifestyle. Well, the Green New Deal really is based on the assumption that we can all still live a middle class lifestyle. And how are we going to do that given those ecological crises? Well, we're going to do it because we have the technology to do it. That all of the ecological crises that we have identified can be dealt with through technology. So it asserts as a reasonable goal the middle class lifestyle, which we call middle and therefore think it's kind of average, but is actually an incredible level of affluence in the history of the world and in fact compared to much of the world today. So what we're really talking about is maintaining an extraordinarily affluent lifestyle and doing it through technology. That somehow technology can overcome all of the ecological crises we have identified. So here's what I would like to say. That shit's crazy. It's crazy. There is not going to be an ongoing middle-class lifestyle for most of the population of this planet, and technology is not going to achieve it. Now, I have now identified myself as an outlier, yes? Somebody off on the margins, because I don't accept two of the most common assumptions in the contemporary United States, which is that we can keep these balls up in the air, juggling them indefinitely, and we can do that because of the magic of technology. I think both things are inconsistent with reality. All right. Now, we can come back in conversation and talk about why I think that. But for now, at least, except for the purposes of discussion, that those are questions, that it's a reasonable thing to ask, can we continue this level of affluence? And it's a reasonable thing to ask, can technology keep us afloat? Right? But for purposes of discussion, just to exercise your minds a bit and think about this, what if we can't keep this level of affluence, and what if technology is not going to make it possible? All right. Well, then we've got some reckoning in front of us, yes? And what I'm going to suggest is instead of the philosophy that I've just outlined, which I would call the more and more philosophy, we have to start thinking about a fewer and less world. Right now, we know the world's population is continuing to grow. We're over 7.5 billion, I think the last time I looked, heading toward 8. It's a matter of some debate about where that human population might top out at current demographic patterns, whether it'll be 8, 9, some people say 10. Right? But that's a lot of people on this planet. Right? And the current philosophy says, well, more is okay. More people's fine. And those people are seeking to consume more things. The current philosophy is more and more. Population isn't a problem and consumption isn't a problem. It's going to keep going indefinitely. I think more and more is psychotic. I think it's inconsistent with reality. And what do we call it when somebody walks around spouting things that are inconsistent with reality? We call them crazy, psychotic, yes? If I walk around telling you that I was placed here by Martians and I'm really a divine being from another planet, and I'm, you know, at some point you would say, that's inconsistent with reality. So you're crazy, you're psychotic. We're a psychotic society. Instead of more and more, we have to think about fewer and less. Fewer people consuming less. We have to ask a simple question that everybody, except people out on the margins, everybody else wants to avoid. And often it's phrased as, what is the carrying capacity of the planet for human beings? How many people can this planet sustain? Now, that's a tough question because it's not just a question of how many people, yes? It's a question of at what level are those people consuming? So it's really two questions. The question of what is the carrying capacity of the planet isn't a raw number. How many people can the planet sustain? The question is how many people can it sustain at what level of consumption of both energy and other materials? Okay? First thing to understand is there's no algorithm out there to run to give you a number. This is not in the realm of equations. I mean, people might use equations to try and help answer the question, but there's no way to put some data into a computer and get a number. Right? We're working off our best guesses. And the other reason we can't predict it, of course, is that we don't know where history is heading. There are contingencies in the world we can't predict. Okay. Now, I still think that's an important question to ask, even though we will always be imprecise in our attempt to answer it. What is the carrying capacity of the planet? How many people at what level of consumption? How often do you hear, let's digress briefly. How often do you hear mainstream politicians, people running for office, asking those two questions? When's the last time you saw a candidate for Congress ask that question in a debate? No, you've never heard it, because those are political losers. Nobody wants to talk about population, in part because the few people who do talk about population tend to be racist and xenophobic. The people who tend to talk the most about population tend to be crazy white people. And some of you may be saying, wait, isn't that redundant? Crazy white people? Crazy? White people are kind of crazy by definition, yes? It's okay to laugh at that, even if you're white. It is. I'll digress from my digression. Why are white people crazy? Because we grew up thinking we were special because we're white, and that's crazy, yeah? And no matter how hard you try to shed that as you get older, it's still pretty crazy. And it's hard to get rid of all the crazy the culture gives you. If you're unsure about what I'm saying, if I said crazy men, that'd be redundant too, yes? Yeah, see, all the women are not, yeah, no shit, that's crazy shit. Because men are crazy. Why? Because we grow up thinking we're superior by virtue of being men. And no matter how much as we get older, we might try to shed that. It still leaves us a little crazy, yes? So non-white people always dance carefully around white people because they're crazy. And women always dance carefully around men because they're crazy, yes? It's okay. People are nervous. It's okay. I'm a white guy. I mean, I'm just acknowledging what seems self-evidently true, yes? Doesn't mean I, hate myself or anything. It's just, you have to, sort of know who you are in the world. Okay, back away from the digression. Most of the people who talk about population right now, not most of, let me rephrase that. Many of the people, including those who are the most prominent in media depictions about this issue, who talk about the problem of overpopulation, the problem of too many people, who advocate for population control, are often either racist or xenophobic or both. That is, they not so secretly want to reduce the population of non-white people, and they often want to block immigration and keep, in this case, the United States, keep the United States the country it was meant to be, yeah? White people with passports that say USA, that's what God intended. That's well known. It's right in the Bible. Okay, I'm digressing again. I'm trying to get a rise out of you. I either want you to chuckle or be pissed off. That's all. I don't care which. I just want to make sure everybody's awake. Okay. So it's not surprising that population is not a popular issue in politics, partly because a lot of the people who do highlight it are people you don't necessarily want to go to lunch with. Here's another reason it's not a popular issue. 8 billion people on the planet, let's say roughly. Right? Does anyone know of any non-coercive methods by which you can dramatically and quickly reduce that population? Non-coercive. I mean, there are coercive methods. You know, in a fascist state, you could just, you know, sterilize everybody or do any number of things. Those are what we would call coercive methods, yes? And I hope most of us are not in favor of coercive methods of that nature. What kind of non-coercive methods are there to dramatically reduce the birth rate? Well, it's hard to come up with. So it's not only a question that attracts a certain number of nasty folk to it, but nobody's got a very good answer. Right? Now, we said that the carrying capacity of the planet is a function of the number of people and the level at which they consume. All right, let's talk about that second question. Right? The middle-class lifestyle, the affluence with which we have to which we have become accustomed. Once you've lived at that level, is it easy to dramatically scale down your lifestyle? No, it's hard. It's hard. It's especially hard if you try to do it in isolation, yes? Right? But even collectively, it's hard to do. Right? Well, one of my favorite authors summed this up with a beautiful phrase: the things that once possessed can't be done without. Think about the number of things in your life that might fit that term or that phrase. Let me repeat it. The things that once possessed then can't be done without. Right? Things that you can live happily without until you have them, at which point they become necessities, yes? The most obvious example is this, right? I might have mentioned I was born in 1958. You don't have to do the math. It just means I'm old. It doesn't even matter how old. I'm in the category of old. 61 years old. Of course, there were no cell phones, smartphones, no computers, at least not computers accessible to ordinary people when I was born. And we lived quite happily without them. So the things once possessed that can't be done without. And it's not just new technological gadgets. It's once you acquire a level of affluence that gives you access to certain things, it's very hard to give them up. Here's the most recent example in my life. I got home last night about 8:30, and there was the crew out in front of our house digging up the street from the city water department. Must have been a leak in the pipe somewhere. And I walked into my house and the water was off. No big deal, right? I mean, you know, potable running water was not a feature of human existence until fairly recently. But of course, given the way the world is organized, if it had continued on, it would have been quite a problem. Not simply because of comfort, you know, but partly because of that, because we've become used to things. Right? So we're dealing with two questions: the number of people and the things those people consume. Right now, we live in a more and more society, and I'm suggesting we're going to have to think about a fewer and less society, fewer people consuming less. That if there is going to be an enduring human presence on this planet at a scale that we're used to, that is a fairly large human population, if there's going to be an enduring human presence, that is, if a lot of us are going to still try and live on this planet, right, we're going to have to think about how to reduce the number of those people and how to reduce the number of things those people consume in a society that is not conditioned for that task, and in fact has been conditioned for exactly the opposite, which is more and more. Okay? That's tough, yes? Now, let's go back. I said I don't have exact numbers. You might be saying, well, you're talking kind of vaguely. And I think it's okay to talk vaguely, because we don't have to know exactly how many people can survive on this planet over the long term, or exactly how much they consume to know that it's fewer and less. The carrying capacity of the planet into the future, I'm going to suggest, is going to be less than 8 billion people, consuming dramatically less than we now, in the aggregate, consume. And I'm suggesting that no one has a way to figure that out. There is no non-coercive method to reduce the human population that has been proposed or ever been successful. And moving to a lower energy, lower level of consumption world is difficult for everybody. Notice I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not saying it's these two Jacksons. You know, they're the ones who are, you know, Jeff Bezos, richest person on the planet by current calculations. Right? It's easy to hate Jeff Bezos. You know, the guy who created Amazon, gutted the American economy. He's worth whatever he is these days, $98 billion, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to hate Jeff Bezos, yes? If Jeff Bezos was here, right, I might suggest that the appropriate moral response to the presence of Jeff Bezos would be to beat him senseless, hang him up by his heels from that little rafter, and slit his throat and let him bleed out like a pig as a warning to other people like Jeff Bezos who capture an extraordinarily, insanely obscene portion of the world's resources, yes? You can see why that would be an appropriate response to Jeff Bezos, yeah? And it's easy to train our attention on Jeff Bezos, but we're all part of this. We're all implicated. Even if you're saying, listen, Jensen, I'm an ACC student, barely getting by. I share a 2-bedroom apartment with 13 other students, and I eat ramen noodles every goddamn day. Don't point a finger at me. I'm still going to point a finger at you, because if we live in this culture, we are living with affluence that's unknown for virtually most of human history. It doesn't mean there aren't differences in our level of complicity with the system, right? But it's to recognize that it's way too easy to point fingers, because if we were in Jeff Bezos' shoes, what would we be doing? Interesting question. Okay. Pardon? Bathing in money. All right. So fewer and less, not more and more. The fourth position, the sensible position that I said I hold, is to think about these things. Notice I have yet to propose a ready-made solution, yes? And I'm not going to, because I don't have one. And if I did have one, you should assume I'm a lunatic. If I just outlined problems that are quite deep and quite frightening. And if I turned around and said, but don't worry, I have the solution, you should assume I'm either a lunatic or I'm trying to con you. Nobody has such. It doesn't mean there are no solutions, no projects, no responses that aren't part of moving toward the solution. I'm not saying there's nothing that can be done. There are a lot of things that can be done, and people are doing them, and I'm quite glad they are, and I try to contribute to those when I can. But I think it is folly to assume there is a solution. That's why, although I am glad the Green New Deal is out there being discussed, I don't think the problem with the Green New Deal is the one that we are most often told. We're most often told the Green New Deal is too radical, yes? If you haven't been following the news, trust me on this one, that the most common critique of the Green New Deal is it's too much too soon. It's too radical. I want to suggest the problem of the Green New Deal is exactly the opposite. It's not radical enough. Now, it doesn't mean, as I said, I or anyone else has a substitute for the Green New Deal to roll out. It means that if we can't at least tell the truth about the nature of the world we live in and how we came to face the problems we have, it doesn't seem to me that any solutions are likely. If you can't correctly analyze the nature of a problem, the solutions you might propose to solve that problem are unlikely to get us all the way home. And so I think it's important to start speaking differently about the nature of the world we live in. Now, I realize this is not an upbeat message, yes? But here's why I think you should leave this room upbeat tonight. Because a lot of folks, myself and others, see the world in these ways. But if you go out and try and talk about it, what is the most common response? If you voice the kind of fears you have in the back of your mind about this. Let's say you go to a party, right? And you're chatting with friends, and you say, listen, let's okay, you know, we can talk about what's on Netflix tonight, but I'd really like to talk about your views on the carrying capacity of the planet and whether you think 8 billion people is really a sustainable human population. And by the way, on the question of energy consumption, do you think we can maintain this level of consumption? And do you really think technological solutions are going to get us all the way home? Now, if you were to offer that at a party, what would happen? No, yeah, you're right. I mean, people don't, oh, wait, people don't gather around. Go over and let's go see what he's talking about the carrying. No, you know, people move away. I know, this happens to me all the time. It could be because I'm an obnoxious asshole across the board and people just don't like to talk to me. That could be a reason as well. I don't want to discount the possibility that the reason people don't talk to me goes beyond the analysis I'm offering. But certainly everybody knows that this is not the way to win friends and get elected to Congress. Yet a lot of people still hear those voices in the back of their heads saying, things are bad, they're getting worse, and they're getting worse faster than we ever thought, and what's going to happen? And so the reason I think this is actually an upbeat message is because if you ever had any thought like this in your life and have had trouble finding a place to articulate it, all I'm telling you is you're not crazy. And it's nice to not feel crazy. And I think more and more people are starting to fear that whether it's Republicans, centrist Democrats, or progressive Democrats are starting to fear that no one is really addressing the problem honestly, and therefore no one is really thinking about solutions that can take us all the way home. And that is the best I got for an upbeat ending. I got a little affirmation from Jackson. My man Jackson, thank you very much. All right. No, you don't have to clap. Don't clap.
So repeat that last part again, what your affirmation is?
The affirmation is that if you have ever, in the dark of night, when you were by yourself, thought anything like what I am talking about, all I'm telling you is you're not crazy. You're not depressed. You're not a loser. You're not any of the things that sometimes people will say if you bring up troubling truths. And increasingly, people are thinking about this, yet there aren't places necessarily to think about it, talk about it, and give voice to those fears. And fears and concerns that we don't give voice to don't typically get resolved. Right? They linger and they fester, and eventually they come out in even more destructive ways. So, I've already identified myself as an old guy, right? And there's only one other old guy in the room as far as I can tell. And so I realize the world can sometimes look different to younger people. So let's then open this up to whether the remarks I made resonate or don't, where you might find a place to challenge, or where you might have questions if you want me to try and clarify something. The floor is open. And they are recording this. The cameras are stationary, so they're not going to turn on you, but I'm not sure if voices will pick up, probably not on this mic. So for the camera, I will repeat and summarize questions and comments. Floor is open. You going to let the old guy take the floor? One of the two old guys? All right, go ahead, old guy number 2.
So I had a conversation with a bunch of students at TSU yesterday.
TSU is? Oh, Texas State University. Okay. Uh-huh.
And just as a whole, how many of you have thought about bringing children into this world? Quick hands. Do you feel comfortable with that? Would you go ahead, or would you, like, how many of you would go ahead bringing children into this world?
Like maybe not right now, but I'm ready.
Okay. So, do you have, like, if you could tell the President of the United States who's sitting here in front of us, you know, you could send a message to him. There's a precondition for you to be able to have children in the world. What would your precondition be? You know, something has to happen before you can say, hey, I am 100% confident we can bring children into the world. What would that be?
Interesting question. So for the tape, it's a reasonable thing to ask the question, do I have a right to bring children into the world given the nature of the world in which we live? If one wants to bring children into the world, what is the one thing that you would like to see happen to make that more morally acceptable a choice? What needs to happen? Interesting way of posing the question.
I guess if I'm reading the question right, I think a degree of like family planning would have to go into that before deciding to bring a kid into the world.
There would have to be some public policy around family planning.
Something like that.
Maybe it's a way of just asking you to think about priorities. When you look at the world, what is highest on your list of actions we need to take collectively? And let me piggyback on that. We can all take private actions, personal choices that might move us forward to a better world, yes? Not using as much energy ourselves. Those are personal decisions, and I'm all for people doing it. I do some of them myself. But I think most people would also recognize there needs to be a shift in public policy, that individual actions alone, given the nature of the economy and the society we live in, are not going to be adequate. So is in the realm of public policy, which means collective action. Public policy means we decide together, which means at some level deciding through government, the class that you're all taking with Roy. Right? What would those priorities be for a shift in public policy? There's no right answer, so just throw out ideas. I taught for 26 years. The one thing I got very good at was waiting. I can wait out students indefinitely. Now, hold on for a second. Let's see what comes out of the group. What are the priorities you see?
Reduction in gas emission, I guess.
So the reduction in the burning of fossil fuels, CO2 emissions. Okay? Which then leads to the question, how would one achieve that?
More funding for mass transportation.
Okay, we're a car-based culture in the United States. Individual transportation. In some parts of the country, you literally cannot get around and be a functioning member of society without a car. Even in large cities, like, let's pick one off the top of our head, Austin, Texas, a metro area of 2 million. We have mass transit that means getting anywhere without a car is extremely onerous, and now increasingly getting anywhere with a car is extremely onerous. So it's the worst of both worlds. The lack of mass transit imposes costs on people who have to take mass transit because it's inefficient, because we don't have enough capacity. And it imposes a burden on people who don't use mass transit as traffic slows and the infrastructure can't keep up.
More popular use of electric cars.
More popular use of electric cars. Yeah, you're going to get pushback on that, though, because over here she's saying, no, the problem isn't, whether cars have gas or electric necessarily. It might be too many cars. So you're going to have to fight it out with her. Right, okay. So are electric vehicles an improvement over gasoline-powered vehicles.
Where the electricity comes from.
Depends on the electricity that comes from. And by the way, where do the components of an electric vehicle come from, including the batteries? They come from the earth. So even if the electricity is with renewable energy, there's still a climate cost in the extraction of all those metals and rare earth metals and all sorts of things. So you would want to have some idea of the relative costs of all these things, yes? It's a technical question that's not irrelevant to resolving the issue, even though you might say we still have to move away from a car-based culture. Yeah. So back to CO2 emissions. You know, here's one of the real difficult questions. How are we going to reduce CO2 emissions? Right? Well, there are really three things that have been proposed, and then we'll open it up. One is a system that was called or still is called cap and trade, which creates a ceiling on how much carbon can be burned, but allows people to trade it. One of the critiques of that is, like any other system that's complex in the business world, eventually business figures out how to game the system, yes? People with money are very good at figuring out how to make more money independent of the consequences. So some people say, well, we should move to a carbon tax carbon, so that a gallon, for instance, a gallon of gas, instead of costing whatever it is now, $2.86, will cost $8. And of course, if you raise the cost of that fuel, consumption of it will go down. All right? Other people will say, no, a tax doesn't solve the problem either, because a tax then generates income that's going to be spent for other carbon. And what we need is a hard cap and some sort of system of rationing, perhaps going back to the World War II model, right? So people are debating those kinds of things. None of them are obviously correct. All of them have to be looked at in some detail and argued out. Those are the kind of things that we're going to have to start talking about. Other comments, questions, disagreements? Yeah, go ahead.
So, in your opinion, what would be the most beneficial, first step to both population, declining population and use of and consumption of energy and resources? Not just first step. What can we do to get started?
So what do we do let's take the second one first. What do we do to try and start moving toward a society in which not only the rich people stop all the what they call conspicuous consumption, like riding on a private jet, right? Can we all agree that it would be a good thing if people didn't take private jets? That if, 3 people didn't get up in the air in a jet to get across the country, okay? Can we all agree that probably we should reduce jet travel overall? That we don't really need to be flying around as much as we do? That we really don't need to get on a plane, to go to Central Florida, to go around Disney World, to be amused? That we can find other ways to amuse ourselves? Yeah. If you've ever been to Disney World, that's an easy one. Okay. So maybe we have to eliminate private jets. Maybe we have to greatly reduce jet travel. Maybe we have to get used to the idea that nobody's going to fly much anymore. Right? That, in fact, we're going to ground all the jets, except for, emergency purposes or something. Right? Maybe there's no way to get to a sustainable human presence on the planet without giving up on the idea of air travel. And you can keep going down from there, right? So one way to think about this is what we're going to have to give up. But that's hard if we're still thinking about the more and more society. So I think underneath all of that is a more foundational question, which is thinking about what does it mean to be a human being and what does it mean to live a good life? Because the current society tells you to have a good life is to consume, yes? And to be mobile and to have options. Maybe we have to live in a world in which people aren't so mobile and have fewer options and still figure out how to lead a good life, a life that's fulfilling. You can't propose a social order in which everybody's miserable, yes? That's not going to be a winning political project. So you have to think about, what does it mean to be human? What are we really after in the world? And there's some interesting ways to think about that, right? One is to recognize that this level of consumption was not the norm for most of human history, and people were able to find fulfilling lives. And number two, to look at research that says consistently, after a certain level of income, additional increases in income and consumption do not make people happier. Social scientists evaluate people's happiness, and they found one thing that is clear across the board, that if you're in a position of material deprivation, if you're impoverished, it's hard to be happy, which is not surprising, and if anybody in the room has ever been in that position, you know it from experience. Right? But after one reaches a level of material stability, additional increases in income and consumption do not lead to greater levels of happiness. So we know, both from human history and from research about ourselves, that we can redefine what it means to be happy. We can redefine what it means to live a good life. It's just hard to do it in this society with this economy. So that leads to thinking about a different society, a different economy, all sorts of things. I think the first and most important thing is just to put those questions on the table. And if people roll their eyes at you and say, "You're such a freak," nobody's ever going to do that. Everybody loves to fly, and I want to go to Disney World, so kiss my ass. Or whatever people say to dismiss it, right? To just smile and say, "Thanks for your feedback, but I still think this is important." And then looking around for the people who didn't roll their eyes and building support and building a different way of seeing. On the population thing, I got nothing. I got nothing for you. That is the one. That's why people don't talk about the problem of population, because no one has an idea of how to do it. Number one, if you go from 8 billion people to a considerably lower population, who is going to support people in their elderly years? We've been in a state of exponential growth for so long, it's not clear how we're going to turn this around. But the fact that nobody has an answer doesn't mean it's not an important question. Somebody had a hand. You were going to get in. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to touch on the air travel aspect.
Uh-huh.
Because it's an argument I hear a lot.
Mm-hmm.
To eliminate air travel almost completely. But I don't understand how that would be, like in the world we live in right now, how that would be a logical solution. Because we live in a country that increasingly relies on globalization.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, businessmen, when they need to travel, they wouldn't take a car,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, to go like from here to New York or
Yeah.
something. Or for example, cargo that's traveling nonstop between not just the U.S. but all countries.
Sure.
It just, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me why that would be our first step to just completely eliminate it. Because I know there's a lot of companies out there like Airbus and some of the airlines as well who are actually working to try and create Airbus, especially electric planes. They're working to
Yeah.
develop those,
Okay.
while airlines are trying to use more renewable fuels.
Okay. So your point about whether a serious reduction in air travel is either feasible or necessary is well taken, but I would suggest that you're asking that question with the assumption that the current economy will continue, and I'm suggesting it won't. Either we shift out of the current economy and the assumptions of it and the demands of it. We either do that through rational planning or the world will do it for us. And at that point, then, lots of things we take as important, like massive cargo ships going from Chinese factories to the US to deliver flat-screen TVs, and air travel for either business or entertainment, that all of those things are going to be no longer feasible. And we will redesign an economy based on not an ongoing commitment to them, but the elimination of them. I used air travel because it's the easiest, because if you look at air travel, a significant proportion of it, by anyone's definition, is frivolous. Here's the example I always use. I was flying somewhere for work. I was going to Dallas, and there was a guy in the boarding area who had no luggage. He didn't even have a, like a briefcase or a bag. And I said, "So what's up? Where are you going?" He says, "I'm just going to Dallas for the football game." Flying from Austin to Dallas for a football game and returning in one day is not going to be on the agenda in a low-energy world. There's a lot of air travel that is frivolous by anybody's definition. Right? And so it's just one place where you can see that the things that once possess that then can't be done without really does work. Things that are actually, when you step back and think about it, kind of crazy. Anybody ever been to children's birthday parties lately? Affluent people, you want to see, the way to see how crazy the world is just to look at run-of-the-mill, normal, sort of affluent people and look at what they do. And most of it is quite literally insane. Like, go to Zilker Park and watch kids' birthday parties and, heaps of plastic things and this and that and massive amounts of waste to celebrate some snot-nosed 8-year-old's birthday. Come on. I was a snot-nosed 8-year-old once. I didn't deserve that. No, I didn't. Stuff that has become normalized that would have been impossible to imagine even a generation or two before, and simply can't go on indefinitely unless you believe in magic technological solutions that are going to pull out of the air a way to do all this. Okay. If you think I'm trying to get you to look at the world differently and start to question everything, the answer is yes. That's what we have to start doing. Look around at everything we take for granted and think, is this consistent with an enduring human presence on the planet? And a lot of it isn't. And again, I'm not preaching from on high. I engage in some of those same activities. But we have to start thinking about it. And talking about it, which means you're going to annoy the shit out of everybody. So here's an example about air travel. I have a friend, he's 83 years old, grew up in a Depression-era farm economy. He grew up in a world before fossil fuels changed everything. When he was born, and for the first years of his life, his family farmed behind a horse and a mule. No tractor. Okay, different world he grew up in. Well, he's famous now, and he flies around all sorts of places. And every time he says there's a delay in a flight, and you know what happens when there's a delay in a flight, everybody gets grumpy, yes? He always says to people in the boarding areas, he's chatting to them, he says, "What makes us think we have a right to cross the country in a few hours? Where do we get this idea that we have a right to cross this country in a few hours? Doesn't that seem a little odd?" So far, nobody's taken a swing at him, but it doesn't make him popular. But it's an interesting question, yes? Where did we get the idea that at the drop of a hat, we can cross the continental United States in a few hours? That's wild. That's all I'm talking about. And I crossed the continental United States for work and political purposes more than I want to think about. I'm not, again, saying that, the answer to this is for you and you and you to start being saintly. I think we should move in ways we can toward behavior more consistent with that enduring human future, but there are no simple answers to it. I told you I was only going to hold you here an hour, and I already lied by 14 minutes. So let me wrap up by coming over. Here's what we're going to do. If any of this is of interest to you, you might be saying to yourself, how can I hear more depressing shit from Bob Jensen? Yes? That's what you're thinking to yourself. I can just see it. And the answer is you can put your email address and name on this sign-up sheet, and I will sign you up for 2 email lists, one of which, now I'll supply the pen, it's only fair. One of them, that one, is a list I maintain and send out articles I write. The other one is a list of events in the Austin area around subjects like this. If you put your email address on, I'll sign you up to both. Neither one of them is high volume, no more than one message a week about the events, and I only send things out when I write. The other thing is, if you're interested, I brought copies of the books I have written over the last few years that try and cover a lot of these subjects. And if anybody wants a copy of one, I'm going to give you the Roy Casagrande discount, which is you can have it for free. So people can come up and look at those books. It'll give you a sense of what I've thought is worth writing about, what I think is important in the world, and how some of this stuff fits together. And whoever first come, first serve, I only have one copy of each, but you're welcome to it. Earlier, some of you were talking about your four-year college plans, especially if you have questions about the University of Texas. I'd be happy to stay around and talk more about that, since I spent a good portion of my life on that campus. I'd be happy to offer tips and the strong suggestion that you go somewhere else. But if you're determined to go to UT, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And anybody who wants to hang around and offer feedback that you didn't want the whole group to hear, that's fine too. I'm not in a rush to get out. Kayla has the sign-up sheet for those who are in Roy's class and want to get some benefit out of enduring the last hour and 15 minutes. And with that, to my good friend Stephen up in the balcony. Hey, Stephen, where are you? Everybody give a big round of applause to Stephen. Yeah! Woo, 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 woo. Otherwise, we're done. Thanks, folks.